Single dad discovers abandoned girl on the road. Her surprising whisper changes everything forever. Jake was exhausted. After a grueling 12-hour shift at the diner and a few hours at the gas station, he finally found a moment of peace driving home under the fading Texas sun. The road stretched endlessly before him, a familiar route that had become almost meditative in its monotony. He was lost in thought about groceries, bills, and another month where he barely scraped by on 2 jobs. Just as he turned onto the gravel road leading to his modest house, something small and pale caught his eye. A girl sitting on the roadside, her clothes torn and smudged with dirt. Heart racing, he hit the brakes and got out of the car. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you lost?" The girl looked up. Her eyes flickered between fear and curiosity as she stepped back slightly, clutching a worn backpack to her chest. "I'm Lily," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the low hum of the engine. As he spoke to her, Jake felt a creeping discomfort. Here he was, a man about to invite a stranger into his home, unraveling the stability he struggled to maintain for his daughter Sarah. He was acutely aware of the stares and whispers that would follow, the judgment that danced around the edges of small-town life. What would people say? A single dad inviting a young girl into his house. But deep down, he understood abandonment. They shared a common weight. "You can stay with us until we figure something out," he finally offered, his decision colliding painfully with a nagging sense of desperation. As they drove back to his small home, Jake's mind raced with conflicting thoughts. Could he really help her? And what would Sarah think? He feared her reaction, worried that bringing Lily into their home would fracture the fragile dynamic they had forged after losing Sarah's mother years ago. Jake wanted to shield Lily from the world, just as he had tried to shield his daughter. But how to do both? The burdens of fatherhood felt heavier than ever as they settled into awkward silence at dinner. Days passed, and as Lily settled in, her artistic spirit began to flourish. She filled the walls with haunting drawings, impressions of her past tempered by hues of resilience. The anxiety in Jake's chest lightened, if only slightly, in the warmth of her creativity. But soon, praise turned to judgment. Whispers amongst neighbors reached him through closed doors. What was he doing with a girl he barely knew? Was he trying to glove the cracks in his own life with someone else's pain? Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let us continue. When a local gallery owner praised Lily's artwork during a showcase, excitement turned sour. He offered her a chance at recognition, but demanded she share her story, her pain publicly. Jake's heart sank. Was they to exploit this child's trauma for a few bucks? He could feel the tight knot of anxiety pulling at him, suffocating him as he faced the gallery owner. Is art meant to heal, or is it just another way for people to make money off your pain? He demanded, the words trembling on the verge of explosion. The weight of his decision loomed larger than before. He didn't just have Lily to think of, he had Sarah's impressionable mind to protect, even as they navigated a storm of uncertainty together. In that chaos, Lily's status as an outsider threatened to shift the very ground beneath their feet. Just when Jake thought he could shield her, her chilling whisper struck through the air, "What if I don't want to be saved?" Jake stood frozen in the kitchen, the dim light casting shadows around him as Lily's words lingered like a ghost. That simple statement pierced through the protective layer he had wrapped around his fragile family. It was the undercurrent of fear that coursed through his life. Had he incorrectly assumed that all she needed was saving? Her whispered doubt felt like the beginning of an avalanche, shifting his perspective on the obligations he had assumed. Lily was not just someone to nurture, she was an individual carrying her own complexities, her own desires, her own resistance to being pulled into the narrative he had crafted in his mind. As Jake wrestled with this new realization, he could hear the contrasting beat of Sarah's laughter echoing from the living room. The sound pierced his anxiety, reminding him of the sanctuary they had built amidst their shared grief. He inhaled deeply, resisting the urge to run to Sarah and cocoon himself in her innocence. Instead, he felt an overpowering need to confront the reality of the situation. His role was not merely that of a provider but that of a mentor, a guide. He had to help Lily navigate her pain, not define it for her. That was new territory, and it terrified him. The next day, uncertainty loomed like a storm cloud as he prepared breakfast. He could think of nothing but Lily's words. He glanced at her drawing hanging on the wall, a child's vision of freedom, a vivid burst of color against a backdrop of dark scribbles. Here was a child who had seen the world and wrapped it in art, yet carried scars too deep for him to comprehend. "Hey, Lily," he called, trying to mask the depth of concern in his voice. "What if we talked about your artwork? I want to understand it." He braced himself, anticipating her withdrawn response, but was taken aback by her keen interest. Draped across the table were sketches of birds taking flight. "It's freedom," she stated simply, her brow furrowing with earnestness. "But it's hard to fly when you're caged." Jake felt the irony of her statement wash over him. Wasn't he that what he'd been trying to do for both of them? Shield them from the world, yet, in doing so, imprison them in their own fears. As the days passed, their dynamic shifted. Jake took deliberate steps to empower Lily's voice, encouraging her to share her story, but on her terms. During art sessions, he offered her the space to discuss not just her pain but her aspirations. Each of their conversations peeled back layers of vulnerability and guilt, lending him courage to confront his own perceived failures as a father. Then came the night when he challenged himself to take action. He hesitated at the entrance of the gallery, the haunting whispers of ill intent resonating through his mind. In the chaos of his thoughts, he resolved to meet the gallery owner once more, to assert that Lily's art could not be exploited for profit alone. He wasn't just advocating for her. He was advocating for himself as a father, expressing a deeper understanding of their shared paths. Each step toward confronting the gallery owner was a step toward breaking free from the shackles of guilt. For too long, he had resisted the flavors of life outside of survival, and now his interactions carried a fresh purpose. The journey with Lily was not just about her recovery, it was about his evolution. As he left the gallery that night, exhilaration pulsed through him. They were no longer merely surviving, they were carving their own identities from the remnants of pain. Jake realized that facing the world with Lily meant facing his own shadows, and it ignited a spark of determination within him. That night, as he tucked Sarah into bed, a thought flickered within him. He could transform their story, shifting from victimhood to empowerment. This was just the beginning. Both he and Lily could redefine what it meant to soar free. However, just as hope took a firm root, his phone buzzed insistently in his pocket, a message from Sarah's school. The urgency of the text regarding an upcoming assembly saw the ground shake beneath him once more. He couldn't help but question what awaited him within those walls. Would they recognize the journey he and Lily now embarked upon? Would he be judged anew? With uncertainty looming, he prepared for what could be yet another confrontation, not just with others but with the truths within himself. As the message blinked on the screen, it posed a daunting question: how would he face what came next? The following morning came with a weighty silence, the kind that felt packed with whispers and unspoken fears. Jake could still see the message from Sarah's school flashing on his phone, a stark reminder of the impending assembly, a space where the scrutiny of parents and educators could turn judgment into a public spectacle. After a hurried breakfast, he found himself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, his expression a blend of resolve and trepidation. He was no longer just a father protecting his children, he was an advocate for change. The same impulse that drove him to confront the gallery owner now urged him to face the assembly head-on. However, confidence was a fragile thing, and it teetered on the edge of his anxiety. Would they see him as the father forging a path of self-discovery, or would they cast him in a role he did not want to play, a man clinging to the remnants of a shattered family? Arriving at Sarah's school felt like stepping into a living painting, vibrant and full of life yet intricately complicated. As kids dashed about, the air was filled with the sweet tang of youthful energy juxtaposed against his own weighty apprehensions. He felt like a spectator in a world he did not belong to, but then he thought of Lily and the flying birds, their freedom igniting his courage. While waiting in the auditorium, Jake's gaze drifted to the other parents. There were clusters of small conversations buzzed like static. He could sense the judgment in lingering eyes that darted between him and the children. Doubt tried to nag at him, whispering echoes of inadequacy. Yet he forced it down, gripping the armrest of his chair until his knuckles turned white. When it was finally time for the assembly to commence, Jake felt the familiar flutter of anxiety in his chest. The principal stood at the podium, welcoming families and sharing news. Amidst the chatter about upcoming events and school improvements, his mind wandered back to the night at the gallery, how he had asserted his fatherly role. The feeling of being in control, of properly advocating for Lily, pulled him from the clutches of doubt. Then, as if on cue, Sarah's name was mentioned. Our students have persevered this semester, showing tremendous growth, especially in creative endeavors. The principal gestured toward the display corner, where children's art adorned the walls. Jake's heart raced. That was where Lily's sketches belonged. He pictured her fierce determination filtered through her colorful strokes, and he recalled how her growth mirrored his own. Yet, as the principal continued, dropping accolades on other children, a sickening realization crept in. There was no mention of Lily. He shifted in his seat, indignation growing like a flame against the backdrop of his earlier doubts. What did this absence say about his contribution, about Lily's unrecognized talent? Suddenly, a thought flickered in his mind, igniting a bold move. Before he could second-guess himself, he stood up, his pulse racing. The world around him hushed as he made his way to the podium. The principal's confused expression met him halfway, but there was something deeper in Jake's eyes, a fire simmering beneath a calm exterior, an urgency stemming from his desire to elevate Lily's voice. "I'd like to speak," he stated firmly, feeling the weight of eyes turn toward him. "I want to take a moment to talk about creativity and resilience, specifically as it relates to my daughter and her incredible artwork. In a world where creativity should flourish, we need to recognize the voices that may go unheard." The murmurs began to swell around the auditorium like a tide. Jake's heart thundered against the walls of his chest as he confronted the jarring reality of speaking out. He was no longer merely surviving, he was evolving. What began as a defense of Lily spiraled into a broader call for acknowledgement of all children navigating their own complex journeys. But as his voice resonated through the hall, a familiar face at the back caught his eye. There stood Lily, her small frame hidden in the shadows, her wide eyes for once alight with understanding. And he wondered if this moment of vulnerability could pave the way for something monumental, not just for them, but for every child in that room. Yet just as solidarity began to swell within him, a sharp reminder sliced through his exhilaration. From the corner of his eye, he spotted someone observing him with a predatory gaze, a figure he never expected to see again. He felt the ground beneath him wobble, the assembly fading into the background, leaving only a raw sense of impending confrontation. Who was this person, and what did their presence mean for Jake and his burgeoning liberation? As the tension thickened in the air, the answers threatened to shatter everything he had begun to build. Jake stood at the podium, words pulsing through him like the rhythm of a drum. The murmurs of the assembly faded, replaced by a single urgent pulse that filled his ears. He had thought he was stepping forward for Lily, yet as that lingering gaze defined his world, he knew he had also stepped into an arena much larger than himself. This was about breaking walls, about embracing unfiltered truths and uncharted territories of parenting and creativity. That he steadied himself against the lectern, trying to harness the tremors of uncertainty coursing through him. The predatory gaze seemed to bear down like a storm cloud, the weight on his shoulders suddenly heavier. Yet, instead of succumbing to that weight, Jake recognized it, the menace. It could either be a fear chronicling his past failures or a challenge prodding him toward victory. He would choose the latter. How many unseen stories reside within these walls? He continued, his voice breaking free from uncertainty. We celebrate scores and achievements, but what about the quiet resilience of every single child, the ones who feel invisible, the ones who fight battles we may never know? No system is perfect, but we can build a foundation of understanding, one where stories are shared and honored. His heart raced as he spoke, emboldened by the thought of shifting perspectives. The challenge was daunting, but with each word, he felt himself renew. The shadows of failure that once haunted him felt lighter. He was not the man who faltered despite capturing only echoes of inadequacy. He was a catalyst for change. As he locked eyes with the elusive figure in the back, recognition drowned him in confusion. It was Mark, his old friend turned rival and architect at the school. Betrayal was etched into Mark's face, a reminder of a past that should have stayed buried. The tension now tinged with a personal conflict, added layers to Jake's burgeoning lecture. He could feel the room's collective breath, the judgment swaying between uncertainty and approval. The principal shifted nervously beside him, and Jake realized he had moved beyond an isolated father's plea. The assembly was feeling the undeniable weight of his words, their attentiveness sparking behind their eyes. Would Mark stand to confront him? Would he unravel Jake's newfound momentum? There was an impending clash resting in the air, suspended between vulnerability and confrontation. Creativity is not just a luxury, it's a necessity, Jake declared, his voice revealing further urgency. When we stifle voices, we risk losing moments of brilliance and depths of emotion. He felt the resonance of truth in those words, an assertion of the battles he had been fighting within himself against the barriers life had drawn around him. Amid the intense focus, a small but striking smile broke across Lily's face, a stark contrast against the burden Jake sensed through Mark. For the first time, Jake realized how driven he was not just by Lion's art, but by a newfound desire for strength, a desire to forge connections that bridged gaps of silence, creating a canopy under which both children and adults could thrive. Yet even as hope surged within him, Mark's presence whispered of trouble ahead. The man crouched like a predator ready to pounce, a stark reminder that caution was still required. Would he degrade Jake's outburst, turning allies into skeptics? Before Jake could process his next move, Mark's lips curled into a smirk, one that seemed calculated and dangerous. Is this really about your daughter, Jake, or are you merely posturing? The assembly held its breath, uncertainty arching through the space. Mark's words landed like a grenade. That it was a striking reminder of the potential for chaos, for unraveling all he had constructed in that moment. Jake squared his shoulders, rallying his resolve. The time had come to grapple with his past and the man who represented it. Would this pivotal moment fortify his newfound strength or plunge him back into familiar shadows? Could he face Mark and lean into that confrontation while navigating his role as a father? With his heart pounding, he prepared to retaliate, poised to defend his newfound voice and those of the children echoing through the walls of their silent struggles. Jake's mind raced. He could practically feel the heat from the assembly's collective gaze, their anticipation simmering in the air. Mark's taunt reverberated through him, pressing at the seams of his newly found resolve. Doubt gnawed at his confidence, but wasn't he going to let the past chain him down any longer? The realization struck him, standing here, in front of everyone, was not just about defending Lily, it was about reclaiming his own narrative. Posturing? He echoed, his voice steady. Is it posturing to stand up for the silent? I'm not here to pretend, Mark. I'm standing here to speak the truths that need to be heard. Each word seemed to shovel dirt over the remains of doubt. He was laying the foundation for a different version of himself, one unshackled from fear. Mark's face tightened, the provocation returning to his eyes. You want to talk about truths? He challenged, stepping forward. Then expose yourself. This isn't just about the kids or their stories, it's about yours. What makes you believe you have the right to lead a conversation about creativity and honesty? Jake felt his pulse quicken. Each word Mark spoke rang true, peeling back layers he had worked so hard to mask. Facing his past failures became unavoidable, the bruises left by their fallout, the moments when Jake had faltered after they had once shared aspirations. Summoning his deepest insecurities, he realized that confronting them was the only way he could emerge stronger. I have my scars, Mark, Jake replied, his voice gaining weight and depth. I'm standing here, not as someone who claims to have all the answers, but as a father, a man willing to own the mistakes that have gotten me here. Deeper shadows loomed around him, urging him to succumb to the unease they nurtured. But those shadows were also a part of him, reminders of resilience, renewed intentions, and the fierce love he held for Lily. She was his anchor, and he would not let the specter of doubt pull him from his path. I am not looking for perfection. I'm searching for connection, he continued, each word lacerating the tension. Creativity is about taking risks, sharing vulnerable stories, and lightening the weight of being invisible. That's the truth I want for my daughter, and that's the truth I'll fight for. A ripple of approval swayed through the assembly, one that felt tangible. The faces around him transformed from skepticism to curiosity, embers of understanding igniting within them. Yet, Mark remained unmoved, his smirk fading into an icy grimace. What do you really know about fighting for anything? Mark replied, quietly lethal. The accusation hung heavily, each syllable steeped in history, dredging up memories of unfulfilled dreams and blighted intentions. Jake took a breath, the atmosphere thickening with a challenge, one that dug deeper than mere words. This was about so much more than a simple lecture. It was about identifying his worth amid the noise of others' expectations, and wrestling with his own presence within the chaos of creativity. I know what it's like to be afraid to share my voice, Jake said, his tone sharp but aimed directly at himself. But I also understand what it means to break free from it. His words seemed to resonate, engendering a visible shift in the assembly's regard. They began to see him not just as a man leveraging his daughter's story, but as a father determined to advocate for all equally invisible children. In that moment of revelation, Jake felt the spark of clarity and awakening of both purpose and identity. Mark, however, remained relentless. But can you really change anything? Or are you just another voice lost in the crowd? The question slashed through Jake's hard-won momentum, reaching into the very core of his resolve. Fractured memories teased him moments when he stood paralyzed by what others thought. But he had pushed through that darkness, rehabilitating his will. With the podium firmly in his grasp, he prepared to respond, emboldened by the same truth he had shared moments ago. This was a defining moment, a call to action stronger than his doubts. However, the looming confrontation was only the beginning. Could Jake channel this newfound strength to enhance his relationships not just with Lily, but with the community surrounding him? Mark's incessant hostility raised the stakes, threatening everything he had built upon vulnerability. Would Jake's challenging path lead to liberation or to further discord? He welcomed the conflict but could feel the tension already shifting, teased by the possibility of deeper revelations just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The intensity of the moment washed over Jake, the power of his declaration tugging at the fragile strands of his self-doubt. He locked eyes with Mark, feeling as if every gaze in the assembly had sharpened, anticipating his next move. It wasn't just a question of words anymore, it was a collision of past and present, a reckoning that demanded authenticity. Change. Jake said, voice hardening. I may not have all the answers, but I'm here to find out what that looks like. To do something that matters. The firmness in his voice surprised him, igniting a flicker of faith. Each syllable he spoke began to drown out the echoes of cynicism, a defiant battle cry against the insecurities that had haunted him for too long. The room shifted, some members leaning forward, intrigued. Jake felt their curiosity cradle him, transforming his fears into a burgeoning sense of belonging. Yet, lingering in Mark's eyes was a challenge not easily dismissed. You think showing up makes you a leader? Mark provoked, stepping closer. What leadership have you displayed? Just standing there, hoping to start a conversation. It's not enough. Jake inhaled deeply, the air thick with anticipation. Mark's words were barbs, each one striking at his newfound courage. The fear of inadequacy wrapped its cold fingers around his heart, causing him to briefly falter. What if this was just another misguided attempt at redemption? Digging his heels into the ground, he committed to this moment. I'm not the man I used to be, Mark. I may not have been a leader then, but I'm becoming one now. Change doesn't happen overnight, he continued, each word drawing from the depths of his experience. But it starts with the willingness to step up, to be vulnerable. I'm leading by example, and that has to mean something. As he spoke, he realized he wasn't simply there for the assembly, he was there for himself. Each articulated thought became a brick, fortifying the unsteady foundation he had constructed. He could feel Lily's spirit guiding him, urging him to stand for the very essence of their future. Mark's demeanor shifted, the glint of disbelief now mingling with a hint of respect. But just as quickly, it morphed back into that familiar hostility. You think because you've put on this mask of conviction, you can effect real change? What a delusion. A wave of irritation shot through Jake. It dawned on him that Mark's disdain was less about him, and more about Mark's own fears, his battles not yet confronted. The realization ignited another wave of determination. Mark, I'm not deluded. I'm merely courageous enough to show my flaws, to expose myself for the world to see. Maybe that scares you. The silence that followed felt electric. Faces reflected contemplation, and Jake swiftly used that opening. How many of you are haunted by your fears? He called out, surveying the assembly with newfound fervor. What stories are we leaving untold because we're too afraid to share? Life isn't about perfection, it's about growth and learning from our mistakes. I've failed, and I'll likely fail again. But I'm committed to making things better somehow. And as he spoke, a quiet ripple of agreement began to surface, a soft defiance against the struggle they all felt. Even among the stillness, Jake grappled with the fragility of his position. Would that be enough to rally their support? The tension was palpable, thickening the air as discontented murmurs intermingled with hesitant nods, yet, one thing remained. He dared not look back at Mark's vacant gaze, refusing to grant any power over his burgeoning resolve. This moment was brandishing an edge of transformation, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. Still, deep shadows lingered, entwining with memories of past failures and self-doubt. Would they truly embrace his message? Suddenly, a new thought emerged, clear and strong: nothing connected with true vulnerability was futile. As Jake stepped away from the podium, the rush of blood in his ears faded just enough for him to catch a breath. He had begun to carve a path, but had he ventured deep enough into this new territory? More than the assembly's reaction, he felt the weight of potential. What could emerge from dismantling the walls he had built? Was this the start of a new relationship with Lily and the community? Or would opposition from Mark snuff out his resolve before it truly began? The stakes were higher than he had anticipated, yet he quietly acknowledged that perhaps this was merely the inception of a greater journey that tested the very core of his being. The necessity loomed: he had to confront Mark again, and soon. There was still so much left unsaid. As the crowd began to disperse, Jake stood frozen in place, his thoughts a tangled web of anxiety and ambition. He had spoken with passion, but the warmth of their acceptance felt tentative, fragile, as if easily shattered by a single misguided step. Mark had been more than confrontational, he had become a mirror reflecting Jake's insecurities back at him. His feigned confidence clawed against the remnants of self-doubt that threatened to consume him once more. Walking away from the podium, Jake exhaled slowly and scanned the familiar surroundings, his mind racing. What had he actually accomplished? Each word felt more like a fragile promise than a solid commitment. His heart sank at the thought of just floating back into a life marked by mediocrity, one governed by the expectation that he should simply keep his head down and follow. But where would that path lead him? Determined not to return to his old ways, he ventured toward the courtyard. The simple act of being outside in the open air settled his soul. A more vibrant tapestry of life unfolded before him. Children playing, laughter punctuating the air, resonated with the heartbeat of a community he longed to engage with on a meaningful level. He recalled Lily's laughter, the way it had ignited joy in his life, and suddenly, the ache of her absence felt sharper than before. Seated on an empty bench, he closed his eyes and reflected on the conversation with Mark. He recognized that there was a fierce battle within him. The need for validation clashed with the desire for authenticity. This internal wrestling told him that he had to confront his feelings, particularly when it came to leading others. Simply being present wasn't enough. He needed substance, and he needed a clear strategy for how to communicate his vision to the community, an invitation rather than a declaration. Digging deeper into his thoughts, he began to enumerate small tasks he could initiate to show genuine leadership. It started slowly, organizing a weekly meetup where community members could share experiences, fostering an open dialogue where their stories could be heard. But he knew this wasn't just about gathering people, it was about building trust. Could he truly create an environment where voices, including his own, could unfold securely? Just as a whisper of hope began to flicker, doubt crept back in. What if they didn't buy into his vision? What if he wasn't persuasive enough, charismatic enough? The fear of rejection gnawed at his insides, a familiar sensation that sought to pull him into its suffocating grasp. For a moment, he almost retreated into resignation. But then another, softer voice emerged within him, the resolve that had propelled him to speak up in the assembly. He would embrace this uncertainty, speak from the heart, and allow himself to be vulnerable. Fingers tapping restlessly on his knee, he set a plan in motion, surprised by the waves of excitement coursing through him. A series of small gatherings could open the door to conversation and connection, bridging the gap between intention and action to make his dream resonate. It was a risk, an invitation to step from the shadows into the light. Fueled by the fire of prospective change, he drafted an email on his phone, detailing his idea. The words flowed freely as he outlined his thoughts, the mere act of writing shaping a newfound clarity. He would take each step no matter how intimidating with intention. Suddenly, a message chimed on his phone, breaking his concentration. It was a notification, a news article featuring Mark's latest initiative, a community project that highlighted his abilities as a leader. The sense of urgency surged, he had to act quickly. Jake stood, purpose swelling within him, as he felt the weight of his promise crystallizing into resolve. He could no longer merely float in the current of others' decisions. To lead, he needed more than just initiative, he needed to dismantle barriers within himself. There was still time to confront Mark, not just for his sake, but to understand his adversary, to redefine the very nature of their conflict. The time had come to face Mark once and for all, not in anger, but in an earnest pursuit of understanding. Jake hoped that in this confrontation, he would uncover the truths that could turn the tide not only for himself but for them both. As Jake reached the corner of the street where Mark was known to frequent, an electric pulse of anticipation coursed through him. Dialogue options raced in his mind like an unscripted play, each one more daunting than the last. He wrestled with his emotions, weighing bravery against the risk of rejection. He couldn't shake the image of Mark's confident smile when he spoken on stage that day. Would Jake's vulnerability shatter that facade or fortify it? He took a deep breath, visualizing this conversation as his battleground. The sidewalk stretched before him like a tightrope, testing his resolve, forcing him to confront not just Mark, but the facade he had built around his own insecurities. Turning the corner, he spotted Mark leaning against a lamppost, engrossed in conversation with a couple of familiar faces. The laughter echoed, a stark contrast to Jake's inner turmoil. As he approached, each step felt like a declaration, grounding him further in his purpose. All at once, doubt wormed back in, whispering harmful thoughts. What if this was just a fool's errand? What if Mark dismissed him outright? Jake hesitated, but the vision of a more integrated community, of engaging authentically with those around him, propelled him forward. He chose to disrupt the uncertainty swirling in his mind with action. With each footfall, he felt the weight of his intentions crystallizing. He was not merely seeking a confrontation, he was looking for resolution, understanding, and potentially a bridge. "Hey, Mark." The unfurling of his voice surprised him. It was firm, yet laced with an undercurrent of vulnerability that he had fought hard to embrace. Mark's head whipped around, his expression shifting from surprise to something akin to amusement, as if Jake's presence were an unexpected plot twist in a familiar story. "Jake. What's up?" There was a jovial lightness to Mark, a demeanor that disarmed Jake momentarily. "I wanted to talk to you about the assembly," Jake began, each word risking the fragile connection he hoped to build. "I've been thinking about leadership and what it means to really connect with people. I could use your insights." Mark studied him for a beat, eyebrows raised, as if Jake had begun reciting Shakespeare in a crowded coffee shop. In the silence that followed, Jake felt the familiar sense of self-doubt creeping back, but he insisted on pushing through. "I believe we could do more together, perhaps come up with ideas that benefit the neighborhood," Jake pressed, his voice growing steadier. Your project captured some excitement. I think that is something both of us should build upon. At first, Mark's gaze reflected skepticism, a mirror to Jake's own fears. But then he chuckled, a genuine laugh that stirred something in Jake's chest. You're seriously going to go after this, huh? You know, it's not just about throwing ideas out there, right? Leadership is tough, it means people are actually depending on you. I know, Jake replied, each word carefully measured. But I want to explore what is possible, and I'm willing to admit I can learn from you. I'm trying to find my footing, and I could use someone who knows this landscape better than I do. Mark seemed to consider this carefully, and the tension hung thick in the air. Jake felt exposed, as if his deepest insecurities were laid bare in front of not just Mark but a gathering crowd that might be eavesdropping on their exchange. Would his courage crumble under scrutiny? Just then, as if fate interjected, Mark's phone buzzed, snapping him from contemplation. Hold that thought, he said, glancing at the screen. I've got to handle some things. Sure, Jake replied, suppressing the twinge of disappointment that surfaced. He had taken the most substantial step forward yet, but now impending self-doubt threatened to overshadow his triumph. As Mark walked away, a weight lifted slightly. Jake had spoken his truth. Yet within that moment of pride, new thoughts flooded in. Was he truly ready to face the complexities of leadership, especially with someone like Mark? As he turned to walk away, frustration welled within him. This exchange had sparked a flicker of possibility, yet so many questions lingered unanswered. What did it truly mean to lead? And could he transform this single interaction into the beginning of a broader change? With renewed energy, Jake glanced back, watching Mark disappear into the distance. Somehow, he understood that this confrontation was only the prologue, a mere opening line to a vast narrative waiting to unfold. Jake lingered at the crossroads of action and reflection. He would need to brace himself for the questions that lay ahead, questions that would challenge every notion he held about leadership and self-worth. But for now, he clung to one ultimate truth: this was just the beginning of a journey for both him and Mark, and he was determined to navigate it together. Little did he know, a confrontation on the horizon would soon test everything he believed about leadership. Jake walked away from the street corner, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. He felt torn between doubt and determination. Each word he had shared with Mark clanged in his ears, reverberating back to him in the form of questions. What if that laughter Mark had shared with others was a barrier he could never breach? What if he remained an outsider, merely watching the actions of charismatic leaders like Mark from the sidelines? As he navigated home through the familiar landscape of his neighborhood, Jake's mind raced with reflections. The rustling leaves overhead seemed to mimic his turbulent thoughts. He caught glimpses of people engaging, laughing, pulling together in ways he had always observed but rarely participated in. That longing for connection stirred deep within him. He remembered childhood memories of mingling in playgrounds, effortless exchanges that had slowly diminished into a soul-numbing isolation. What changed? What invisible barrier had he erected? That evening, he sat at his kitchen table, papers strewn before him like fragmented goals. He scribbled notes, fueled by a flickering hope. What he realized was not only about Mark or leadership, it was about himself. Each scribble was a question posed to the universe: what did he want? How could he grow? He could feel an urgency to elevate his life, to uncover layers of strength he had long buried under self-imposed doubts. When had he decided to disengage from the world? Years of prioritizing survival over connection had taken their toll. Leadership, he thought, couldn't be solely about dynamic moments or speeches, it must involve real relationships and shared vulnerabilities. Those revelations anchored deep within him, igniting a desire not just to break barriers with Mark but to bring forth a revolution within himself, to dismantle the walls that had kept him small. Jake leaned into this epiphany, recognizing that he didn't have to wait for someone else to unlock doors. He could initiate change, even if it felt daunting. He returned his gaze to the empty kitchen, the air humming with potential. He felt drawn to take steps toward a community he'd overlooked. Starting simply, he could foster openness, shed layers of self-doubt, and invite others to walk alongside him on this path. A network began forming in his mind: local coffee shops to explore, hobby groups to join, simple acts of kindness to extend. The next day, armed with a fierce determination, he ventured out. The first stop was the local coffee shop. As he entered, the inviting aroma wafted around him. He scanned the small tables, searching for the courage to engage. It wasn't just about relaying thoughts, it was about forging real connections. Taking a deep breath, he approached a small group gathered around a debate on a popular topic. "Mind if I join?" The words slipped out before doubt could restrain them. Their open smiles served as an invitation into the conversation. The discussion flowed easily, and Jake found himself contributing, weaving in thoughts that showcased his own perspectives, but also those of others. The initial awkwardness faded quickly, replaced by an undercurrent of genuine exchange. As he navigated through the dialogue, he witnessed leadership in action, collaboration and mutual respect fused seamlessly, feeding into a shared learning experience. Every interaction fed Jake's budding belief in himself. With small gains, the encouraging feedback from others fueled his emerging resilience, urging him to venture further beyond his comfort zone. Each moment felt exhilarating, igniting sparks of possibility, yet, even as his confidence grew, a nagging thought lingered: the impending confrontation with Mark. Would he be able to instill his newfound insights into their next exchange? Would it lead to the meaningful partnership he envisioned? Just as he was about to drown deeper into contemplation, another challenge emerged. A loud clatter came from the door, catching his attention. A young girl, no older than 8, stood there, disheveled and visibly shaken, surveying the bustling crowd before her. The moment hung suspended, the air thickened with an inexplicable tension. Jake's heart raced. Why was she alone? Did she need help? Suddenly, the real test of his character materialized before him. The answers weren't just in his conversations but in these moments of real need that demanded action. He took a step closer, intent on discovering her story, aware that the challenges of leadership, of courage, vulnerability, and connection would profoundly shape the path ahead. Jake stood rooted to the spot, the swirling thoughts in his mind settling into a singular focus. Here was a moment that transcended the concerns of his past, the dilemma of survival and the fears tethered to his loneliness. The young girl's presence illuminated a truth he was on the verge of embracing: true leadership lay in service and commitment to others, a principle he desperately wanted to instill in both Lily and Sarah. Approaching her cautiously, he bent down so he was at eye level. "Hey there, I'm Jake. Are you alright? Do you need help?" His voice was soft but steady, channeling warmth and reassurance. The girl looked up, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. "I got lost," she whispered. "I can't find my mom." In that moment, Jake's heart swelled with purpose. He could have easily brushed by this girl, absorbed in the complexities of his own life, yet here she was, a reminder of the stakes surrounding compassion and connection. He took her hand gently. "Let us find her together," he said, his tone unwavering. "You're not alone." With a sense of conviction fueling him, he could feel the earlier confrontations, the community assembly, and even the history with Mark fade into the periphery. The urgency of this moment pushed him forward. He pulled out his phone and dialed the local authorities, all while reassuring the girl they would get through this together. As they stepped outside, Jake scanned the familiar stretch of his neighborhood, suddenly aware of the multitude of faces that defined their small community. He noticed children playing in the park, parents engaging in conversation, and a lingering sense of interconnectedness washing over him. Where he once felt isolated, there now appeared a tapestry woven from compassion, shared experiences, and mutual support. Moments later, a woman rushed toward them, panic etched across her face. This was her daughter, a scene that echoed the importance of empathy Jake was beginning to realize. The instant relief etched on the girl's features as she flew into her mother's outstretched arms sent a thrill through him, a profound understanding that he was exactly where he needed to be. Reassured that they were safe, Jake stepped back, watching them. The weight of satisfaction settled over him as he recognized a shift, a moment of clarity in which he had welcomed vulnerability into his life, transforming it into an act of bravery. This experience illuminated the pathway to his growth, the realization that leadership stemmed profoundly from listening and responding to the needs of others around him. Later that night, as he tucked Sarah into bed, he reflected on the day. "You know, sweetheart," he began, "I helped someone today. A little girl who was lost." He smiled at the thought, a feeling of fulfillment flooding through him. It felt good to be there for someone else. "Did you find her, Mom?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Yes, we did together," he replied, remembering the soft warmth of the girl's hand in his. "It made me think about how we all need each other, how being there for one another can make a difference. Just like we do." From across the room, Lily stood framed in the doorway, a sketchpad clutched against her chest. "Jake," she called softly. "Can I show you something?" Jake nodded, heartening, as she shuffled into the room and revealed a radiant drawing of birds soaring, each wing painted vibrant hues against a backdrop of gentle clouds. "This is what I want to create, freedom and connection," she said, her voice blossoming with newfound confidence. Jake felt his breath hitch. This was a child who had conquered chaos, redefining her narrative through art and now inspiring him in the process. "It's beautiful, Lily. You've transformed pain into something breathtaking," he said, pride swelling in his chest. In that moment, conversations with Mark and community judgments faded into background noise. Jake realized he had evolved from only seeking acts of survival to embracing an invasive hope. Through stepping into the shadows of vulnerability, both he and Lily had found their luminescence in evolution driven by trust and authenticity. With the dawn of a new day ahead of them, inspired by resilience, Jake understood that this journey was only beginning. He could pivot into the future, shifting from mere existence to profound engagement. An undeniable conviction formed within him: transformation required action, both for himself and for those he cared about. Leaving the past behind, he decultivate connections that fortify rather than divide. Victory lay not simply in confrontation, but in collaboration grounded in shared stories. The road ahead promised to be dynamic, yet now Jake welcomed its uncertainty, fully prepared to embrace what boundless opportunities awaited. As he tucked Lily and Sarah in that night, he felt buoyed by purpose and clarity. Jake had truly embarked on a journey of leadership through compassion and connection, a legacy he hoped would resonate through each whisper of vulnerability met with the magnificent potential to soar. Now was the time for action. They could be catalysts for positive change within their community, and Jake couldn't wait to share this vision with everyone around them. This chapter of his life was not just one of survival, it was a powerful declaration of empowerment to be a father, a leader, and a champion of every unheard voice. And as the thought crossed his mind, he felt a stirring urgency. It was time to spread this message far and wide. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment below with your reactions and theories about this conclusion. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. Don't wait even one more second to share. This is the moment to show your support.